Billionaire entered the court, cold and distant, until his ex walked in with DNA test and newborn daughter. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The marble floors of the Manhattan family court echoed with each deliberate step of Nolan Crestwood's Italian leather shoes. At 36, he commanded every room he entered, not through volume but through presence. 6'2" with broad shoulders that filled his charcoal Tom Ford suit perfectly, Nolan possessed the kind of understated power that came from owning half of Manhattan's skyline. His dark hair, meticulously styled with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom without age, caught the harsh fluorescent lighting. Steel blue eyes, the same shade as winter storms, scanned the courtroom with calculated indifference. This was just another business transaction to him, another problem to be solved and dismissed. Mr. Crestwood, his attorney, Leonard Fitzgerald, approached with a stack of papers. The plaintiff should arrive shortly. Are you prepared for... Leonard. Nolan's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd never needed to raise it. This is a formality, a desperate attempt at relevance from someone who can't accept that we've moved on. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd never admit to having. The courtroom felt smaller than his corner office on the 42nd floor of Crestwood Tower, where he'd built his empire from concrete and ambition. Here, surrounded by worn wooden benches and the musty smell of old law books, he felt oddly constrained. Nolan had arrived 30 minutes early, as was his custom. Punctuality was control, and control was everything. He'd reviewed the case file 3 times, though there wasn't much to review. Evelyn Hart, his former, what had she been exactly? Girlfriend, seemed too juvenile for 2 adults who'd shared keys, morning coffee, and 2 years of carefully compartmentalized intimacy. Evelyn. Even thinking her name created an unwelcome tightness in his chest. Auburn hair that caught fire in sunlight. Green eyes that saw through every wall he'd built. An architect who designed spaces with the same precision he used to acquire buildings, but with something he'd never possessed: heart. Their relationship had been perfect in its limitations, both career-driven, both emotionally unavailable in comfortable ways. She understood his 12-hour workdays. He respected her need for creative solitude. They'd meet for dinner twice a week, spend weekends together when schedules allowed, and maintain separate apartments because neither wanted to complicate things with cohabitation. It had worked until it didn't. The end came without drama. 2 adults recognizing that parallel lines, no matter how close, never actually touch. She'd been increasingly distant, absorbed in a project redesigning the children's wing of Mount Sinai Hospital. He'd been closing the biggest commercial deal of his career. They'd simply drifted. I think we both know this isn't working anymore, she'd said over wine at their usual restaurant, Maria, where they had a standing Thursday reservation. He'd agreed, shaken hands, split the check, civilized, clean, final, until the phone call. Nolan, I'm pregnant. The memory of her voice, nervous but resolute, made his jaw clench. He'd been in his office, reviewing blueprints for the new Crestwood residential complex in Brooklyn Heights, when his private line rang. Only 5 people had that number. That's impossible. He'd leaned back in his chair, watching the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. We always used protection. Always, except that last night, at your apartment. You remember? He did remember. 3 weeks before they'd officially ended things, when they'd both pretended physical intimacy could bridge the emotional distance growing between them. When protection had been forgotten in a moment of desperate connection that felt more like goodbye than hello. But admitting that would mean admitting vulnerability, admitting that their perfectly controlled relationship had, for one night, been anything but controlled. You're better than this, Evelyn. He'd hung up. Now, 10 months later, she was apparently going through with this charade. Nolan straightened his tie, navy silk with a subtle diamond pattern, and checked his Patek Philippe watch. 28 p.m. The hearing was scheduled for 2:30. Sir? Leonard touched his arm. Are you... The courtroom doors opened. Nolan turned, expecting to see Evelyn's attorney, David Chen, whom he'd researched thoroughly. Instead, she walked in. Time stopped. Evelyn Hart looked exactly the same and completely different. Her auburn hair, now longer, was pulled back in a low bun that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. She wore a simple black dress. Nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress, but it fit her perfectly. accentuating her natural grace. At 31, she possessed the kind of beauty that didn't announce itself, but slowly overwhelmed you. But it wasn't Evelyn who made Nolan's carefully constructed composure crack. It was the baby in her arms. A tiny girl, maybe 3 months old, wearing a cream-colored onesie and wrapped in a soft pink blanket. The baby's head rested against Evelyn's shoulder, dark hair, his color, visible beneath a delicate knit hat. Isla. The name from the legal documents suddenly became real. Not a legal abstraction, but a person. A little person who'd been alive for 3 months while he'd convinced himself she didn't exist. The baby stirred, making a soft sound that somehow carried across the courtroom and hit him like a physical blow. Evelyn's eyes found his. For a moment, the careful mask she wore slipped, and he saw exhaustion, determination, and something that looked almost like regret, not for bringing the case, but perhaps for what they'd both lost along the way. She took a seat at the plaintiff's table without acknowledging him further. The baby, Isla, remained perfectly calm, as if courtrooms were familiar territory. All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Thornfield. Nolan stood, his legs suddenly unsteady. This was supposed to be simple. Prove the child wasn't his. Pay whatever settlement would make this go away. Return to his orderly life. But watching Evelyn gently adjust the blanket around her daughter, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Doubt. What if she really was his? What if that one night of unguarded passion had created this perfect little person who was now 3 months old and completely unknown to him? The judge began speaking about procedures and DNA results, but Nolan couldn't focus. He kept staring at the baby, searching for familiar features, wondering if those tiny fingers might carry his DNA, his legacy, his unexpected future. What if everything he thought he knew about control, about family, about love, was about to change forever? Judge Margaret Thornfield, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and penetrating brown eyes, surveyed the courtroom with the authority of someone who'd presided over countless family disputes. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. We're here today for the matter of Hart versus Crestwood, regarding the establishment of paternity for the minor child, Isla Rose Hart. She glanced down at her papers. Mr. Chen, you may proceed. David Chen, Evelyn's attorney, rose from his seat. A man in his 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he moved with quiet confidence. Your Honor, my client seeks only what is fair, recognition of paternity and appropriate support for her daughter. Nolan watched Evelyn as she listened, her posture straight despite the baby in her arms. Isla had woken up and was making soft cooing sounds, her tiny fist gripping the edge of her blanket. Even from across the room, Nolan could see the child's eyes, a startling blue-gray that made his breath catch. They were his eyes, the same shade that stared back at him every morning in his bathroom mirror. The defendant, Mr. Nolan Crestwood, has disputed paternity, Chen continued, despite being in an intimate relationship with my client for 2 years. We have here the results of the court-ordered DNA test. Leonard Fitzgerald stood. Your Honor, my client has always maintained his position. Any relationship between the parties ended amicably months before the alleged conception date. Alleged? Evelyn's voice was quiet but sharp. It was the first time she'd spoken, and every head in the courtroom turned toward her. Judge Thornfield raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Nolan felt heat rise in his chest. He knew that tone, the one Evelyn used when someone questioned her integrity. He'd heard it during their relationship when contractors doubted her designs, or when clients tried to diminish her expertise because she was a woman in a male-dominated field. Ms. Hart, Judge Thornfield addressed her directly. Please let your attorney speak for you. My apologies, Your Honor. Evelyn's cheeks flushed pink, but her gaze remained steady. She adjusted Isla, who had begun to fuss slightly, making those tiny sounds that somehow seemed amplified in the formal courtroom. Chen opened a manila folder. Your Honor, we have the DNA test results from LabCorp, conducted under court supervision 3 days ago. The moment stretched like a held breath. Nolan found himself gripping the edge of the defendant's table, his knuckles white against the dark wood. Every rational part of his brain had prepared for vindication, proof that this child wasn't his responsibility, wasn't his unexpected complication. But looking at Isla's face, at the way she turned her head toward sounds with alert intelligence, at the dark hair that matched his own, rational thought felt increasingly foreign. The test confirms paternity with 98% accuracy, Chen announced. Nolan Crestwood is the biological father of Isla Rosehart. The words hit Nolan like a physical blow. The courtroom seemed to tilt, the familiar sounds of shuffling papers and muffled coughs fading into white noise. 99.98%. Not uncertain, not questionable, definitive. He was a father. He had been a father for 3 months, and he hadn't known, hadn't wanted to know. Mr. Fitzgerald? Judge Thornfield's voice seemed to come from underwater. Does your client wish to respond to these findings? Leonard looked at Nolan, who felt frozen in place. The careful control he'd built his entire life around was cracking, piece by piece. He thought of his own father, distant, critical, more interested in business mergers than bedtime stories. He'd sworn he'd never repeat that pattern, but he'd been repeating it from the moment Evelyn had called. My client, Leonard began, then paused, clearly waiting for guidance that wasn't coming. In that moment of silence, Isla began to cry. Not the soft fussing from before, but real crying. The kind that spoke of hunger or discomfort, or simply the overwhelming strangeness of being in a courtroom, instead of somewhere warm and familiar. Evelyn immediately began the automatic rocking motion that all mothers learn, murmuring soft words that Nolan couldn't quite hear. But the crying continued, growing stronger, more insistent. Perhaps we should take a brief recess, Judge Thornfield suggested, her stern expression softening slightly as she watched Evelyn struggle to calm the baby. No, Your Honor, it's fine, Evelyn said quickly. She's just hungry, I can... But Isla's cries were now echoing off the courtroom walls, and Nolan found himself standing before he'd consciously decided to move. Let me, he heard himself say, the words coming from somewhere deeper than thought. The courtroom went silent except for the baby's crying. Evelyn looked up at him, surprise and something like wariness in her green eyes. Nolan, you don't have to. Please. His voice was rougher than usual. Let me try. For a long moment they stared at each other across the space that represented 10 months of silence, hurt and stubbornness. Then slowly, Evelyn stood and walked toward him. Isla felt impossibly light and impossibly important as Evelyn placed her in his arms. The baby's crying slowed, then stopped entirely as if she recognized something familiar. Her blue-gray eyes, his eyes, focused on his face with startling intensity. The courtroom faded away. Judge Thornfield, the attorneys, the legal proceedings, none of it mattered. There was only this, his daughter, real and warm and alive, looking at him as if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire short life. Hello, Isla, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm your father. She made a soft sound, not quite a coo, and her tiny hand moved against his chest over his heart. The gesture was so simple and so profound that Nolan felt something inside him crack open, something he'd kept carefully closed for 36 years. When he looked up, Evelyn was watching him with tears in her eyes. Not happy tears, not sad tears, but something more complicated. The tears of a woman who'd carried this burden alone, and was finally, maybe, not quite so alone anymore. Your Honor, Nolan said, his voice stronger now but still careful as he held his daughter. I'd like to formally acknowledge paternity, and I'd like to discuss arrangements for my daughter's care. Judge Thornfield nodded slowly. Very well, Mr. Crestwood. Given this development, I think we should schedule another hearing to discuss custody arrangements and support. Ms. Hart, are you agreeable to this? Evelyn wiped her eyes and nodded. Yes, Your Honor. But I want to be clear. Isla's well-being comes first, always. Understood. The judge made several notes. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I suggest both parties consider what kind of arrangement would best serve the child's interests. As the hearing concluded and people began filing out, Nolan remained standing with Isla in his arms, reluctant to give her back. She had fallen asleep against his chest, her breathing soft and even, her tiny fist still clutching his tie. She likes you, Evelyn said quietly, stepping closer. Up close he could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the way motherhood had both softened and strengthened her. She doesn't know me, Nolan replied, but his arms tightened protectively around the baby. No, Evelyn agreed, reaching to gently take Isla back. She doesn't, but that doesn't mean she can't learn to. As she lifted their daughter from his arms, their hands brushed, and for a moment Nolan felt the echo of what they'd once had, the easy intimacy, the unspoken understanding, the connection he'd convinced himself was just convenience. Evelyn, he started, then stopped, unsure what to say. I'm sorry seemed inadequate. I was wrong. Felt like the beginning of a conversation that couldn't happen in a courthouse hallway. 2 weeks, she said, settling Isla against her shoulder. Think about what you really want, Nolan. Because this isn't about us anymore, this is about her. She walked away, leaving him standing in the empty courtroom with the weight of fatherhood settling on his shoulders like an unfamiliar but not unwelcome coat. For the first time in his carefully planned life, Nolan Crestwood had absolutely no idea what came next. Nolan's penthouse overlooked Central Park from the 58th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that had graced the covers of architectural magazines. The space was a testament to minimalist luxury, Italian marble, Danish furniture, and artwork that cost more than most people's homes. Everything had its place, everything served a purpose, and nothing was out of order, until now. He stood in his home office at 11:47 p.m., still wearing his courtroom suit, but with his tie loosened and his jacket draped over a chair. In front of him, scattered across his usually pristine glass desk, were printouts, photographs, and documents. Everything he could find about Evelyn Hart's life over the past 10 months. The private investigator he'd hired, Rebecca Torres, had been thorough. Too thorough. Medical records showed Evelyn had attended every prenatal appointment alone. Bank statements revealed she'd depleted her savings account to pay for the delivery at Mount Sinai, the same hospital where she'd designed the children's wing. Credit card records showed purchases of baby furniture, diapers, formula, and a breast pump from a secondhand store in Queens. A secondhand store. Evelyn Hart, who used to shop at Bergdorf Goodman when they were together, buying used baby furniture. The photographs were worse. Rebecca had taken them over the past week, documenting Evelyn's daily routine. Evelyn leaving her apartment building in Park Slope at 7 a.m., Isla strapped to her chest in a carrier, catching the subway to her architecture firm in Midtown. Evelyn picking up groceries at a corner market, bouncing the baby while she waited in line. Evelyn in Prospect Park, sitting on a bench feeding Isla a bottle, looking exhausted and alone. In every single photo, she was alone. Nolan picked up a particularly clear image. Evelyn sitting in a pediatrician's waiting room, Isla sleeping in her arms, dark circles under her eyes as she filled out paperwork. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 days ago. His chest tightened. While he'd been closing deals and attending board meetings, she'd been navigating new motherhood by herself. While he'd been sleeping 8 hours a night in his temperature-controlled bedroom, she'd probably been awake every few hours feeding their daughter. Their daughter. The phrase still felt foreign, like speaking a language he'd never learned. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, Miranda. The car will be ready at 6 a.m. tomorrow for the site visit in Brooklyn Heights. Also, your father called regarding the quarterly board meeting. His father, Harrison Crestwood, founder of Crestwood Enterprises, a man who'd built an empire but had never learned his son's middle name. They spoke quarterly, always about business, never about anything that mattered. What would Harrison say about having a granddaughter? Probably something about liability and public relations implications. Another document caught his eye. A lease agreement. Evelyn had moved from her spacious one-bedroom apartment in Soho to a smaller place in Park Slope just before Isla was born. The rent was half what she'd been paying, but the neighborhood was family-friendly, close to good schools and parks. She'd been planning for their daughter's future while he'd been pretending she didn't exist. His landline rang, startling him out of his thoughts. Only 3 people had that number: his assistant, his attorney, and Harrison. He answered without checking the caller ID. Nolan. His father's voice carried its usual tone of barely concealed disappointment. I heard about your legal situation today. Of course he had. Harrison Crestwood had eyes and ears throughout Manhattan's legal and business communities. Nothing happened without his knowledge. It's handled, Nolan said, gathering the photos into a neat stack. Handled? Harrison's laugh was dry. A paternity suit involving my son and heir is hardly handled. Do you have any idea what this could do to our reputation? To the IPO we've been planning. Crestwood Enterprises had been preparing to go public for 18 months. The timing was perfect. Real estate market booming, their portfolio stronger than ever, and Nolan positioned as the young CEO who'd modernized his father's company. The child is mine, Nolan said quietly. Silence stretched across the line. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was colder. You're certain? DNA doesn't lie. No, but women do. About timing, about other men, about... Don't. Nolan's voice cut through his father's cynicism like ice. Don't talk about her that way. Her? You're already emotionally compromised. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Nolan walked to his window, looking out at the city lights that never dimmed, never rested. I held her today. My daughter. She has my eyes. Nolan, listen to me very carefully. This woman, Evelyn Hart, she's already proven she can't be trusted. She hid this pregnancy from you, then ambushed you with a lawsuit. What makes you think she won't use this child to manipulate you for years? The words hit harder than they should have because part of Nolan had wondered the same thing. But the photographs on his desk told a different story. A woman who'd had 10 months to demand money or attention and had instead simply coped. Alone. She never asked for anything, Nolan said. She's asking now. For child support. For acknowledgement. Not for herself. For Isla. You're already defending her. This is how it starts. Nolan closed his eyes, seeing again the moment Isla had stopped crying in his arms. The way she'd looked at him as if she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. Maybe, he said quietly. Defending her is the right thing to do. The right thing? Harrison's voice rose. The right thing is protecting everything we've built. Everything your grandfather started, everything I've sacrificed for, everything you're supposed to inherit. One scandal, one public relations nightmare, and we lose everything. Or maybe, Nolan said, surprising himself with his calm, we gain something more important. He hung up before his father could respond. The penthouse felt different now. Not peaceful, but empty. All this space, all this luxury, and for what? To impress business associates? To prove something to a father who would never be impressed? He thought about Evelyn's small apartment in Park Slope, probably cluttered with baby things and filled with the sounds of new life. Messy, chaotic, but somehow more real than anything in his perfectly ordered world. His laptop chimed with an email. Another message from Rebecca Torres with additional surveillance photos. This time they showed Evelyn at a playground in Prospect Park, sitting on a swing with Isla in her lap, both of them laughing at something only they could see. The joy on Evelyn's face was radiant, transformative. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, not the tired, guarded person in the courtroom, but the one who found wonder in simple moments. He'd forgotten that version of her existed. More importantly, he'd forgotten that being around her had brought out a version of himself he'd liked better too. Nolan reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found her number. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. What would he say? That he was sorry? That he wanted to be part of Isla's life? That seeing her today had reminded him of everything he'd lost when they broke up? Instead, he typed a text. Can we meet tomorrow? I'd like to talk. About Isla. He stared at the message for 10 minutes before hitting send. Her response came back almost immediately. Isla has a doctor's appointment at 2 p.m. Mount Sinai Pediatrics. You can come if you want. A doctor's appointment. Something normal. Routine. Parental. The kind of thing he should have been part of from the beginning. I'll be there, he replied. He set the phone down and looked around his penthouse again. At the expensive art that no one else ever saw, at the perfectly arranged furniture that no one else ever used, at the space that had everything except the things that actually mattered. Tomorrow, he would start learning how to be a father. Tonight, he would figure out how to be the man his daughter deserved to have as one. The pediatric wing of Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos of sick children and worried parents. Nolan stood outside Dr. Miranda Walsh's office at 1:55 p.m., holding a paper bag that felt heavier than any business deal he'd ever carried. Inside the bag were things he'd never imagined buying. A soft pink teddy bear from FAO Schwartz, organic baby formula he'd researched for 2 hours online, and a children's book about a father and daughter that had made the saleswoman at Barnes & Noble smile knowingly. He felt ridiculous. A 36-year-old billionaire clutching a stuffed animal in a hospital corridor, wearing a navy cashmere sweater instead of his usual business attire, because somehow jeans and a suit seemed wrong for a baby doctor visit. Nolan? He turned to see Evelyn approaching, Isla nestled in a carrier against her chest. She looked different from yesterday, softer somehow, wearing dark jeans and a cream sweater that made her auburn hair catch the fluorescent lights. But her green eyes held the same wariness he'd seen in the courtroom. You came, she said, and he couldn't tell if she was surprised or disappointed. I said I would. They stood there for a moment, two people who'd once shared keys and morning coffee, now strangers navigating the foreign territory of co-parenting. She's been fussy all morning, Evelyn said, gently bouncing Isla. I think she might have an ear infection. Nolan looked down at his daughter, still so strange to think those words, and noticed she did seem less alert than yesterday. her tiny face slightly flushed. Is that serious? Should we be worried? The questions came out before he could stop them, and he realized he had no idea what was normal for a 3-month-old baby. It's common, Evelyn said, but her voice carried the underlying tension of a new mother who worried about everything. Dr. Walsh will know what to do. Hart family? A nurse called from the doorway. Actually, Evelyn hesitated, then looked at Nolan. It's Hart Crestwood now. For the appointment. The nurse made a note on her chart. Right this way. The examination room was painted in soothing pastels with cartoon animals dancing across the walls. Dr. Walsh, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands, greeted them both without any sign of judgment about the unusual family dynamics. So Daddy's joining us today? She asked cheerfully as she prepared her instruments. Daddy. The word hit Nolan like a physical blow. He'd been called many things. Mr. Crestwood, sir, boss, son, but never Daddy. Yes, he managed. I wanted to. I should know these things. Dr. Walsh smiled as she gently examined Isla, who fussed but didn't cry. First-time parents often feel overwhelmed. There's a lot to learn. Nolan watched as the doctor checked Isla's ears, throat, and reflexes, explaining each step to both parents. Evelyn asked informed questions about feeding schedules and sleep patterns, while Nolan found himself memorizing every detail. The way Isla's eyes tracked movement, how she gripped the doctor's finger with surprising strength, the soft sounds she made when comfortable. Minor ear infection, Dr. Walsh confirmed. Very treatable with antibiotics. She should be feeling better in a day or two. Relief flooded through Nolan, though he hadn't realized how tense he'd been until his shoulders relaxed. I'll write a prescription, the doctor continued, and I want to see her again in 2 weeks. Any questions? What about her sleep schedule? Nolan asked. Is it normal for her to wake up frequently at night? Evelyn looked at him in surprise. How did you know about that? He felt heat rise in his cheeks. I might have done some reading last night. Some reading was an understatement. He'd spent hours on parenting websites, learning about developmental milestones, feeding schedules, and the importance of routine. By 3 a.m., he'd ordered 6 books on infant care and bookmarked 17 pediatric websites. Dr. Walsh explained normal sleep patterns while Evelyn got Isla dressed. When the baby fussed during the process, Nolan instinctively reached out to help, then stopped himself. It's okay, Evelyn said softly. You can help. Their hands brushed as they worked together to get Isla's tiny arms through the sleeves of her onesie. The familiar electricity was still there, but now it was complicated by something bigger. The shared responsibility for this little person who depended on them both. There's a pharmacy on the 2nd floor, Dr. Walsh said, handing them the prescription. And remember, if you have any concerns at all, don't hesitate to call. In the elevator, Isla began to cry, the tired, cranky sound of a sick baby who wanted comfort. Without thinking, Nolan reached into his paper bag and pulled out the pink teddy bear. Here, he said, offering it to Isla. This is for you. The baby's crying slowed as she focused on the soft toy. Her tiny hand moved toward it, and when it touched the plush fur, she made a small sound that might have been pleasure. She likes it, Evelyn observed, and for the first time since the courthouse, she smiled at him. A real smile, not the careful politeness she'd been maintaining. I wasn't sure what to get, Nolan admitted. The saleswoman said pink was traditional for girls, but then I read that color preferences are learned behaviors and babies actually respond better to high contrast patterns, so maybe I should have gotten something black and white, but this one was so soft and… Nolan? Evelyn's voice was gentle, stopping his nervous rambling. It's perfect. At the pharmacy, they waited while the prescription was filled. Isla had fallen asleep clutching the teddy bear, her face peaceful despite the infection. Nolan found himself staring at her, memorizing every detail, the way her dark eyelashes rested against her cheeks, the small birthmark on her left temple, the perfect miniature fingernails. She's beautiful, he said quietly. She has your stubborn chin, Evelyn replied, and there was fondness in her voice, not accusation. And your nose. Your mother's nose. Evelyn looked at him sharply. You remember my mother's nose? Of course he remembered. Margaret Hart, who died when Evelyn was 15, lived on in the framed photos throughout Evelyn's apartment. A kind woman with laugh lines around her eyes, and the same delicate nose that Evelyn had inherited. I remember everything about your family, he said. Your father's terrible golf stories, your sister's wedding planning drama, the way your mother used to make those cookies you tried to recreate every Christmas. Snickerdoodles, Evelyn said softly. She'd make them every December 15th, even when she was sick. They stood in comfortable silence until the pharmacist called their name. As they walked toward the hospital exit, Isla still sleeping peacefully, Evelyn spoke again. "Where did you park?" "I didn't drive. I took a cab." She looked at him strangely. "You took a cab to a hospital visit?" "I thought—" He felt foolish admitting it. "I thought maybe we could ride together, if you wanted, so I could see where you live now, in case of emergencies." Evelyn studied his face, searching for something. "You really want to be part of this, don't you?" "I want to be part of her life," he said carefully. "I don't know how yet, but I want to learn. My car's in the garage, level B." As they walked toward the parking structure, Nolan carrying the diaper bag Evelyn had handed him, he felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but something like possibility. "Evelyn," he said as they reached her car, a practical Honda Accord with a car seat already installed. "About yesterday, about the past 10 months. Don't," she interrupted, unlocking the car. "Not yet. Let's just focus on getting her better first." She was right, of course. Whatever needed to be said between them could wait. Right now there was only Isla, sleeping peacefully with her new teddy bear, trusting that the adults in her life would figure out how to take care of her. As Nolan helped secure the car seat, making sure everything was properly fastened, he realized this was what family felt like. Messy, complicated, but somehow essential. Not the cold efficiency of his father's version of family, but something warmer, more real, something worth fighting for. Evelyn's apartment in Park Slope was nothing like the spacious Soho loft where Nolan used to spend weekends. This was smaller, cozier, with cream-colored walls and furniture that looked lived in rather than designer-selected. Baby gear occupied every surface, a bouncy seat by the window, a play mat in the living room, bottles drying on a rack in the kitchen. It felt like a home. "Make yourself comfortable," Evelyn said, settling Isla in her crib in the corner of the living room. "I'll get her medicine ready." Nolan stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure where to sit. Everything seemed to have a purpose. The couch was covered with burp cloths. The coffee table held baby books and teething toys. This wasn't a space designed for entertaining. It was a space designed for living. A framed photo on the side table caught his attention. Evelyn in a hospital gown, exhausted but radiant, holding a newborn Isla. She looked completely alone but completely content, as if she and the baby were all that mattered in the world. "That was taken about an hour after she was born," Evelyn said from the kitchen doorway, following his gaze. "You look happy," he said, though the word felt inadequate. "I was terrified," she admitted, measuring out medicine with the precision she'd once used for architectural blueprints. "But yes, happy too." His phone buzzed. A text message that made his blood run cold. "Saw the news about your baby mama drama. We still on for dinner tonight?" Cassandra Winters. Blonde, beautiful, and completely wrong for him, in ways that had made her perfect for casual dating over the past 6 months. She was a gallery owner who understood that their relationship was purely physical, who never asked about his feelings or tried to change his schedule. She was also the last person he wanted to think about while standing in his daughter's nursery. "Everything okay?" Evelyn asked, noticing his expression. "Work stuff," he lied, quickly putting the phone away. But Evelyn had always been perceptive. Her green eyes narrowed slightly. "You should know, Nolan. If you're involved with someone else, it's going to complicate things with Isla. I'm not—" He stopped, realizing that technically he was involved with Cassandra. They had standing Tuesday dinner reservations at Le Bernardin. She kept toiletries at his penthouse. Last week she'd mentioned wanting to attend the Met Gala together. "It's complicated," he finished lamely. "Complicated how?" Before he could answer, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn frowned. She clearly wasn't expecting anyone, and went to answer it. "Delivery for Evelyn Hart?" Nolan watched as she signed for an enormous floral arrangement, 24 white roses in a crystal vase that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The delivery man struggled to fit it through the doorway. "I didn't order flowers," Evelyn said, checking the card. Her face went pale as she read it. Without a word, she handed the card to Nolan. "Congratulations on your new family. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other." C.W. Cassandra had found out about Isla. Worse, she'd found out where Evelyn lived. "Who is C.W.?" Evelyn asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Someone I've been seeing." The words felt dirty in this space surrounded by baby toys and the woman he'd once loved. "It's not serious. Serious enough that she knows where I live." Serious enough that she's sending congratulations about our daughter. The roses seemed to mock them from their position by the window. Too large, too expensive, too pointed in their message. They weren't congratulations. They were a declaration of war. She must have hired someone to find your address, Nolan said, pulling out his phone. This is completely inappropriate. I'll handle it. Handle it how? By explaining that your baby mama doesn't deserve flowers? By telling her this whole situation is just an inconvenience you're trying to manage? That's not what this is. But even as he said it, Nolan realized how it must look from the outside. Successful businessman forced to acknowledge illegitimate child, girlfriend marking territory with passive-aggressive flowers. Isn't it? Evelyn's voice was dangerously quiet. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your real life just collided with your obligation to Isla. Isla chose that moment to wake up and begin crying. Evelyn immediately went to her, lifting her from the crib with practiced ease. But the baby's cries seemed to underscore the tension in the room. Let me hold her, Nolan said. I've got her. Evelyn, please. Let me help. Like you helped for the first 3 months of her life? The words hit like a slap. Nolan stepped back, watching as Evelyn tried to soothe their daughter while standing next to flowers from his girlfriend. The contrast was stark. Authentic motherhood next to calculated manipulation. His phone rang. Cassandra's name appeared on the screen. Answer it, Evelyn said coldly. Don't let me interrupt your real life. Against his better judgment, he answered. Cassandra. Darling, did you see my flowers? I thought it was important to acknowledge this new development in your life. This isn't the time. Oh, I'm sure it's awkward, being there with her. But I wanted her to know that I'm very supportive of your decision to step up for your child. Some women might see this as a threat, but I think it shows what a good man you are. Every word was poison wrapped in silk. Cassandra was reminding him and making sure Evelyn overheard that she was the understanding girlfriend, while Evelyn was the complication that had trapped him. We need to talk, Nolan said, but not now. Of course, I'll see you tonight at Le Bernardin. 8 o'clock, as usual. She hung up before he could respond. Evelyn had heard every word. Le Bernardin, she repeated. As usual. How long have you two had as usual? 6 months, he admitted. But it's not what you think. I think you've been living your life exactly as you planned, while I've been living mine around a baby you didn't want to acknowledge. I think your girlfriend just made it very clear where I stand in your hierarchy of importance. Isla had stopped crying but remained fussy, making small, unhappy sounds. Evelyn swayed gently, trying to comfort her. The flowers are going in the trash, Nolan said. The flowers aren't the problem, Nolan. The problem is that you have a girlfriend who thinks sending flowers to your baby's mother is appropriate. The problem is that you have a standing dinner reservation on Tuesday nights while your daughter was learning to sleep through the night. The problem is that I don't know where I fit in your life, and apparently, neither do you. She was right, and they both knew it. Nolan had compartmentalized everything, work, family, relationships, into neat little boxes that never intersected. But Isla had blown those boxes apart, and now he was standing in the wreckage trying to figure out what mattered most. Cancel dinner with her, Evelyn said quietly. If you want to be part of Isla's life, really be part of it, then start making choices that put her first. What if I said I wanted to stay here tonight, help with the medicine, learn what her schedule is like? Then I'd say your girlfriend might not understand. I don't care what she understands. Evelyn studied his face for a long moment. Don't you? Because this is what it's going to be like, Nolan. Sick babies and sleepless nights and complicated schedules. This isn't the glamorous part of having a child. This is the part where you find out what kind of parent you really are. Isla had finally settled against her mother's chest, her breathing evening out. The apartment felt peaceful again despite the tension between the adults. Stay, Evelyn said finally, but call her first. End it properly, because I won't have my daughter growing up thinking she's less important than your social calendar. Nolan looked at his phone, at Cassandra's contact information, at the life he'd built that suddenly seemed hollow and unnecessary. Okay, he said. I'll call her. As he stepped onto the small balcony to make the call, he could see Evelyn through the window, giving Isla her medicine with gentle precision. This was real life. Messy, demanding, beautiful. Everything else was just performance. Time to stop performing and start living. The balcony was barely large enough for 2 people, but it offered a view of Prospect Park and the kind of neighborhood sounds Nolan never heard from his penthouse. Children playing, dogs barking, the distant hum of real life happening below. He dialed Cassandra's number. his fingers surprisingly steady. "Darling, calling to confirm tonight?" Her voice was honey over steel. "I've already ordered the wine. Cassandra, we need to talk about this morning's gesture." "The flowers? I thought they were lovely. A little welcome to motherhood gift for your baby mama." The casual cruelty in her tone made his jaw clench. "Her name is Evelyn, and Isla is my daughter, not an inconvenience." "Of course she is. I'm being very supportive, aren't I? Some women would be threatened by an ex-girlfriend and a baby, but I understand that you're just doing the right thing." Through the glass door, he could see Evelyn settling Isla in her bouncy seat, talking softly to her about the medicine and when she'd feel better. There was no performance in it, no agenda, just a mother caring for her child. "This isn't about doing the right thing," Nolan said quietly. "She's my daughter. I want to be part of her life." "Want to be? Or feel obligated to be? Because there's a difference, darling." The question hung in the air like a challenge. 3 days ago he might have said obligation, but watching Isla fall asleep in his arms yesterday, seeing her grab his tie with those tiny fingers, feeling the weight of her trust, that wasn't obligation. That was something he'd never experienced before. "I want to be," he said firmly. "Well, of course you do. You're a good man. But let's be realistic about what that means. A trust fund, quality education, maybe weekend visits when she's older. You don't need to disrupt your entire life to write some checks." "It's not about money." Cassandra's laugh was sharp. "Everything is about money, Nolan. Don't be naive. This woman saw an opportunity and took it. Now she has you feeling guilty and responsible. But you can't seriously be thinking about playing house with her. Playing house. As if caring for his own child was some kind of game. "I have to go," he said. "Don't be ridiculous. We have dinner reservations and I'm wearing the dress you bought me in Milan. The red one you love. The red dress." He remembered buying it for her. Remembered the way she'd looked in it at various social functions. Remembered thinking she was exactly the kind of woman who belonged on his arm at charity galas and business dinners. Now he couldn't remember why any of that had mattered. "Cancel the reservation," he said. "Excuse me?" "Cancel it. I'm staying here tonight." The silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness. "You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing my daughter. Same thing, isn't it? You think that playing daddy for a few hours is going to make up for 10 months of abandonment? You think that woman is going to forgive you because you show up with a teddy bear and good intentions?" Her words found their target because they echoed his own fears. What if Evelyn never trusted him? What if he was too late to matter in Isla's life? What if he didn't know how to be the father she deserved? "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I have to try. This is a mistake, Nolan. A costly public mistake that's going to damage everything you've worked for. Your father called me this morning, you know. He's concerned about the IPO, about how this looks to investors." His father had called Cassandra. Of course he had. Harrison Crestwood had probably seen her as an ally in talking sense into his son, bringing him back to the world of calculated decisions and risk management. "My father doesn't get a vote in this, doesn't he? He built the company you're about to inherit. He trusts me to help you see reason." Through the window, Nolan watched Evelyn check on Isla, who had fallen asleep again. She moved with quiet efficiency, straightening baby clothes and picking up toys, creating order in the small space. She looked tired but content, like someone who'd found her purpose. "Goodbye, Cassandra. If you walk away from me, from us, for this fantasy of family life, don't expect me to be here when reality sets in. I'm counting on it." He hung up and immediately turned off his phone. When he stepped back inside, Evelyn was folding tiny clothes at the kitchen table, her movements automatic and soothing. She looked up as he entered. How did she take it? About as well as expected. He sat across from her, watching her hand smooth out a onesie covered in cartoon elephants. "She had some interesting theories about my motivations, such as that I'm just feeling guilty, that this will pass once the novelty wears off." Evelyn's hand stilled. "Will it?" The question was asked without accusation, but with the wariness of someone who'd been disappointed before, someone who couldn't afford to hope too much because she had someone else to protect now. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't know what kind of father I'll be. I don't know if I'll be any good at this. But I know that when I held her yesterday, everything else stopped mattering. Even your company, your reputation, the life you've built, especially those things." Evelyn resumed folding, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "You say that now, but what happens when she's teething and crying for 3 hours straight? What happens when you have an important meeting and she's sick? What happens when being her father interferes with being Nolan Crestwood's CEO? Then I figure it out. Together. With you. She looked up sharply. With me? We made her together, Evelyn. Maybe we can raise her together too. We're not together, Nolan. We broke up for good reasons. Did we? Or did we break up because we were both too scared to try for something real? The words hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they wanted to cross. They'd been safe in their controlled relationship, content with their emotional distance. But safety hadn't prepared them for parenthood, and distance wouldn't work when they had a daughter who needed them both. I need to give her another dose in 4 hours, Evelyn said, changing the subject. She'll probably be fussy around midnight when the medicine wears off. I'll stay up with her. Let you get some sleep. You don't know how to take care of a baby. Then teach me. Evelyn studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity or obligation. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, but this isn't about us, Nolan. This is about her. If you're going to be part of her life, it has to be because she needs you, not because you're trying to prove something or work through guilt. I understand. Do you? Because once you're in, really in, there's no going back to your old life. There's no compartmentalizing fatherhood. She becomes the most important thing every day for the rest of your life. Are you ready for that? Nolan looked at Isla, sleeping peacefully in her bouncy seat, her tiny chest rising and falling with perfect trust that the adults in her life would keep her safe. 3 months old, and already she'd changed everything just by existing. I'm ready to try, he said. It wasn't a promise of perfection, but it was honest, and for the first time since he'd walked into that courtroom, Evelyn smiled at him like she believed him. At 11:47 p.m., Nolan discovered that nothing in his business education had prepared him for a sick baby. Isla had been restless since her evening feeding, making small sounds of discomfort that escalated into full crying every time she seemed to drift off. Evelyn had shown him how to check her temperature, how to hold her upright to help with congestion, and how to recognize the difference between "I'm uncomfortable crying" and "something is wrong" crying. This was definitely uncomfortable crying, but it still made his chest tight with helplessness. Try the bouncing motion, Evelyn whispered from the couch, where she was finally getting some rest. Sometimes the movement helps when her ears hurt. Nolan adjusted his grip, supporting Isla's head as he'd been taught, and began a gentle bouncing motion. She was wearing a yellow sleeper with little ducks on it, and her dark hair was starting to curl slightly at the ends. In the dim light from the kitchen, she looked impossibly small and fragile. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, surprised by how natural it felt to talk to her. "I know you don't feel good. The medicine is helping, but you have to be patient." Isla's crying softened to fussing, then to small hiccups of distress. Her blue-gray eyes, so like his own, focused on his face, with the intense concentration babies seem to bring to everything. "That's better," he said softly. "You're okay. Daddy's got you." Daddy. The word came out without thought, but it felt right in a way that surprised him. Not the formal father he'd been thinking of himself as, but something warmer, more immediate. "She likes your voice," Evelyn observed from the couch. "It's deeper than mine. Sometimes that helps calm them down." "My father never," Nolan started, then stopped. He'd been about to say that Harrison had never held him like this, never walked the floors with him during sleepless nights. But that seemed like the wrong story to tell while holding his own daughter. "Your father never what?" "He was very focused on work. I don't think he spent much time on the practical side of parenting." Evelyn shifted on the couch, tucking her legs under her. "What was he like when you were little?" It was strange, talking about his childhood while cradling his own child. The apartment was quiet except for the soft sounds of the city outside, and Isla's gradually calming breathing. "Distant," Nolan said honestly. "He measured success in quarterly reports and stock prices. I think he loved me, but he showed it by providing opportunities, not this." He gestured to the baby in his arms. "Is that why you were so scared when I told you I was pregnant?" The question caught him off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so accurate. "Partly. I didn't have a model for what being a present father looked like. I knew how to be successful, how to provide financially, but the rest?" He trailed off, watching Isla's eyelids grow heavy. "You're doing fine now. I'm terrified I'll mess up, that I'll hurt her somehow, or fail her when she needs me most." "Welcome to parenting," Evelyn said with a tired smile. "I've been terrified for 3 months straight." "You don't look terrified. You look like you know exactly what you're doing. That's called fake it till you make it." Half of parenthood is pretending you have it together while secretly Googling is this normal at 3 a.m. Isla had finally fallen asleep, her small body relaxed against his chest. Nolan was afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had finally given her peace. I should put her down, he whispered. Not yet. She'll wake up if you move her too soon. Give it another 10 minutes. So they sat in comfortable silence, Evelyn curled on the couch and Nolan in the rocking chair, both watching the sleeping baby. It was the most domestic scene he'd ever been part of, and also the most peaceful. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said eventually. Of course. Why didn't you call? After I told you I was pregnant. Why didn't you even want to know if I was okay? The question he'd been dreading, but also the one he owed her an answer to. Because I was a coward, he said simply. I convinced myself you were manipulating me, that the pregnancy was somehow a trap. It was easier to believe that than to face the possibility that I'd walked away from something real. It wasn't a trap. I know that now. I think I knew it then too, but admitting it would have meant admitting that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, which was letting you go in the first place. Evelyn was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. When she spoke again, her voice was careful. We had problems, Nolan. Real ones. We never talked about the future, never made plans together. We were like two people living parallel lives who happened to share the same bed sometimes. We were both scared. Of what? Of this. Of needing each other. Of building something that could break. Isla stirred slightly in his arms, making a small sound before settling back into sleep. The movement reminded them both of what was at stake now. Not just their own hearts, but the well-being of this little person who hadn't asked to be born into complicated circumstances. I need you to understand something, Evelyn said. I didn't file that paternity suit to get you back. I did it because Isla deserves to know who her father is, and she deserves to have him in her life if he wants to be there. But I won't let her be disappointed over and over again. If you're going to be her father, you have to really be her father. What does that mean? It means showing up even when it's inconvenient. It means putting her needs before your schedule. It means being here for the boring parts and the hard parts, not just the cute moments. Like tonight, and teething and tantrums and teenage drama, and college applications and everything in between. Nolan looked down at Isla, still sleeping peacefully in his arms. 18 years stretching ahead of them, full of unknown challenges and joys. The thought should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt like a gift, the chance to be the father he'd never had, to break the cycle of emotional distance that had defined his own childhood. I want all of it, he said quietly. The boring parts, the hard parts, everything, even if it means changing your life completely. Especially then. At 12:15 a.m., Isla woke up hungry. Evelyn prepared a bottle while Nolan changed her diaper, a process that took him 3 times longer than it took Evelyn, but which he completed without disaster. You're getting the hang of it, Evelyn said, settling beside him on the couch as he fed Isla her bottle. She makes it easy. She's perfect. She's not always this calm. Wait until she's had her shots. But even the warning was said with fondness, the tone of a mother who'd found joy even in the difficult moments. As Isla finished her bottle and drifted back to sleep, Nolan realized something had shifted during the long night, not just in his understanding of fatherhood, but in his understanding of what he wanted his life to look like. Evelyn, he said softly. Thank you for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first diaper blowout. But she was smiling as she said it, and for the first time in months, the future felt full of possibility instead of obligation. Outside, the city never slept, but inside the small apartment in Park Slope, a family was learning how to be a family, one sleepless night at a time. Nolan woke up on Evelyn's couch at 6:23 a.m. to the sound of his phone vibrating relentlessly on the coffee table. Isla had finally slept peacefully from 3 a.m. onward, and he dozed fitfully in the unfamiliar space, jolting awake every time she made a sound. Evelyn was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen in an oversized sweater and leggings, preparing coffee. She looked refreshed despite the interrupted night, her auburn hair caught up in a messy bun that somehow looked effortlessly elegant. Your phone's been going off for 10 minutes, she said softly, not wanting to wake Isla. Nolan grabbed the device, seeing 17 missed calls from his assistant Miranda, 5 from Leonard Fitzgerald and 3 from his father. His stomach dropped as he scrolled through the text messages. Emergency board meeting called for 8 a.m. Harrison is furious. Miranda, you need to see the morning papers. Call me immediately. Leonard, where the hell are you? This is a disaster. Harrison, what's wrong? Evelyn asked, noticing his expression. Before he could answer, his phone rang again. Miranda's name flashed on the screen. Miranda, Thank God. Where are you? Have you seen the newspapers? The gossip sites? Mr. Crestwood, this is everywhere. What's everywhere? The story. About you and the baby. Someone leaked details from the court hearing and there are photos of you at the hospital yesterday. The headlines are not good. Nolan closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of public scrutiny settling on his shoulders. What do they say? Billionaire secret baby drama. CEO caught in paternity scandal. Crestwood empire in crisis. Should I read you the worst ones? No. He walked to the window, looking out at the quiet morning street where normal people were starting normal days without photographers and gossip columnists dissecting their personal lives. Who leaked the court records? We don't know yet. But Mr. Crestwood wants to see you immediately. The board is concerned about the IPO. Of course they were. Nolan had spent 2 years positioning himself as the stable, reliable heir to the Crestwood empire. A paternity scandal with a former girlfriend didn't fit that narrative. I'll be there in an hour, he said, ending the call. When he turned around, Evelyn was holding a tablet, her face pale as she scrolled through what was obviously a news article. How bad is it? He asked. She turned the screen toward him. The headline read, Baby Mama Drama, Billionaire Nolan Crestwood's Secret Love Child. Below it was a photo of him carrying the diaper bag outside Mount Sinai Hospital, his face clearly visible. There's more, she said quietly. They have details about the hearing, about the DNA test results. Someone gave them everything. Nolan scanned the article, his anger rising with each paragraph. They'd gotten Evelyn's full name, her profession, even the name of her architecture firm. Worse, they'd painted her as a gold digger who'd trapped him with an unwanted pregnancy. This is character assassination, he said. I'll have my lawyers shut this down. You can't shut down the truth, Nolan. And they're not entirely wrong, are they? From the outside, this probably does look like a scandal. You're not a gold digger. Isla isn't a scandal. She's my daughter. Evelyn set down the tablet and checked on Isla, who was still sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the storm erupting around her. Your father called 3 times, she said. I'm guessing he's not happy about becoming a grandfather this way. My father's opinion doesn't matter, doesn't it? This affects your business, your reputation, the IPO you've been working toward for 2 years. Before Nolan could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Through the window, he could see a man with a camera waiting outside. Reporters, Evelyn said, her voice tight with anxiety. They found my address. Nolan moved to the window, counting at least 3 photographers and what looked like a journalist with a microphone. As he watched, another news van pulled up to the curb. We need to get you out of here, he said. This is my home, Nolan. I can't just leave. You can't stay either. Not with Isla. Not with them camping outside. As if summoned by their conversation, Isla woke up and began to cry. The sound seemed amplified in the tense atmosphere, and Evelyn immediately went to comfort her. It's okay, sweetheart, she murmured, lifting the baby from her crib. Mama's here. Watching Evelyn soothe their daughter while reporters gathered outside like vultures made something fierce and protective rise in Nolan's chest. This was his family now. Messy, complicated, but his to protect. His phone rang again. This time it was Leonard. Nolan, where are you? I need to brief you before the board meeting. I'm with Evelyn and Isla. There are reporters outside her apartment. That's not ideal. Look, I hate to say this, but you need to distance yourself from this situation until the media attention dies down. Distance myself from my daughter? Distance yourself from the optics. The board is spooked. They're talking about postponing the IPO, maybe even reconsidering your position as CEO. Let them. Nolan, think about what you're saying. You've worked your entire life for this moment. Don't throw it away for my family? Leonard was quiet for a moment. I'm trying to help you salvage this, but you need to be smart about it. Being smart got me into this mess. Maybe it's time to try being honest instead. After ending the call, Nolan found Evelyn in the kitchen, feeding Isla, while periodically checking the window. The reporters had multiplied. He counted at least 6 now, with more arriving. I'm going to make a statement, he said. Saying what? The truth, that Isla is my daughter, that I love her, and that anyone who has a problem with that can go to hell. That's going to cost you, isn't it? The business, the IPO, your father's approval. Probably. Evelyn studied his face, searching for signs of doubt or resentment. And you're okay with that? 3 days ago, I would have said no. I would have hired a PR firm to spin this, paid whatever it took to make it go away quietly, and gone back to my life. What changed? Her, he said, nodding toward Isla. Watching you take care of her alone for 3 months while I convinced myself she wasn't my responsibility, realizing that everything I thought mattered was just noise. A loud knock interrupted them, followed by a voice calling through the door. Ms. Hart? This is Janet Mills from Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your side of the story. I'll handle this, Nolan said, moving toward the door. Wait, Evelyn caught his arm. Before you go out there and potentially ruin your career for us, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in her voice made him stop. What? The night I called you, when I told you I was pregnant. She took a deep breath. I didn't call you right away. I waited 6 weeks after I found out. Why? Because I was scared. Because I knew it would change everything between us, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I kept telling myself I'd call tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and then, Evelyn, I spent 6 weeks trying to figure out if I could do it alone, if I should even tell you at all. And when I finally called, you reacted exactly like I was afraid you would. I don't understand. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we both made mistakes. Maybe we were both scared of the same thing, needing each other too much. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had been brave enough to cross before. Outside, the reporters were getting louder, more insistent, but inside the small apartment, something was shifting. What do we do now? He asked. Now? Evelyn looked down at Isla, who had finished eating and was looking around with alert, curious eyes. Now we figure out how to be a family, whatever that looks like. Nolan's phone buzzed with another text from his father. If you're not here in 30 minutes, don't bother coming at all. He turned off the phone and slipped it into his pocket. The board meeting can wait, he said. Right now I need to get my family somewhere safe. The boardroom at Crestwood Enterprises felt like a tribunal. 12 faces around the polished mahogany table, all turned toward Nolan as he entered 45 minutes late, his hair still slightly disheveled from helping Evelyn pack an overnight bag through the back entrance of her building. Harrison Crestwood sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable. At 72, he commanded the room with the same iron presence that had built the company from a single construction project into a billion-dollar empire. Nice of you to join us, Harrison said, his voice carrying the chill of 40 years of disappointment distilled into 4 words. I had a family emergency, Nolan replied, taking his seat at the opposite end of the table. Is that what we're calling it? Board member Margaret Sinclair slid a stack of newspapers across the table. Because the media is calling it something else entirely. Nolan glanced at the headlines without picking up the papers. I'm aware of the coverage. Are you aware, said board member Robert Chen, that our stock price dropped 6% in pre-market trading? Are you aware that 3 major investors have called emergency meetings? Are you aware that the SEC is now asking questions about our disclosure practices? The SEC? Nolan looked at Leonard, who was seated to his right, looking deeply uncomfortable. They want to know if the company had knowledge of any personal situations that might affect leadership stability, Leonard explained. It's standard procedure when there's negative publicity around a CEO. I see. Nolan leaned back in his chair, studying the faces around the table. These people had known him since he was a child. They'd watched him grow up in this company, had mentored him, supported his rise to CEO. Now they looked at him like a liability. The solution is obvious, Harrison said. You issue a statement distancing yourself from this situation. Acknowledge that while the child may be biologically yours, you had no knowledge of the pregnancy and no intention of pursuing a relationship with either the mother or the child. Absolutely not. Nolan, Margaret began. No, his voice cut through the room like a blade. I will not distance myself from my daughter. I will not pretend she doesn't exist for the sake of stock prices. Your daughter, Harrison said the words like they tasted bitter, is 3 months old. You've never been a father. You don't know the first thing about children or family responsibility. This is a midlife crisis, not a calling. You're right. I don't know the first thing about being a father, but I'm learning. Learning? Robert Chen pulled out his phone. Let me read you what the Wall Street Journal said this morning. Crestwood's family values scandal raises questions about judgment and stability in leadership. Investors should be concerned about a CEO who can't manage his personal life attempting to manage a public company. They're questioning your competence, Margaret added. Your ability to lead. Because I acknowledged my daughter exists? Because you've created a public relations nightmare, Harrison snapped. Because you've jeopardized everything we've worked for. The IPO we've spent 2 years preparing, the expansion into international markets, the deals that depend on our reputation for stability and discretion. Nolan thought about Isla, probably napping in the guest room of the Four Seasons, where he'd taken Evelyn and the baby to escape the media circus. He thought about the way she'd looked at him this morning, with complete trust, as if he was exactly where he belonged. What exactly are you asking me to do? He said quietly. Step back, Harrison said. Take a leave of absence until this blows over. Let me handle the IPO, clean up this mess. And if I refuse? The silence that followed was answer enough. Harrison exchanged glances with several board members, the kind of wordless communication that came from decades of working together. The board has concerns, Margaret said carefully, about your judgment, about your priorities, about whether you're still the right person to lead this company into its next phase. You're threatening to remove me. We're trying to help you, Robert said. If you take the leave voluntarily, handle this situation quietly. The board is prepared to support your return once the media attention dies down. How long? 6 months, maybe a year. And what happens to Evelyn and Isla during that year? I pretend they don't exist while you rehabilitate my image? You provide financial support through discreet channels, Harrison said. You set up a trust fund for the child's education and medical needs. You be responsible without being visible. It was exactly what Cassandra had suggested, the same solution his father had probably been planning since he first heard about the paternity suit. Clean, quiet, businesslike. I need a moment, Nolan said, standing. Son, Harrison began. Don't call me son. Not when you're asking me to abandon my daughter. Nolan walked to the window that overlooked Manhattan, the same view he'd had from his office for the past 5 years. 42 floors below, the city moved with its usual relentless energy. People going to work, building lives, making choices that mattered to them if no one else. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. Isla's fever broke. She's much better. How's the meeting? He typed back. Complicated. How are you holding up? Scared, but okay. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. We. Such a small word, but it changed everything. For the first time in his adult life, his decisions weren't just about him. I've made my choice, he said, turning back to the board. Thank God, Harrison said. I knew you'd see reason. I'm not taking a leave of absence. I'm not pretending my daughter doesn't exist. And I'm not going to run this company the way you've always run it. Like human beings are just variables in a profit equation. Nolan, think about what you're saying, Margaret warned. I am thinking. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking about what actually matters. Your legacy matters, Harrison said, his voice rising. The company matters. The family name matters. The family name? What about the actual family? What about Isla? She's not family, she's a complication. The words hung in the air like a slap. Nolan looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd spent so many years prioritizing business over everything else, that he'd forgotten how to love anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. You're wrong, Nolan said quietly. She's the only thing that matters. If you walk out that door, Harrison said, if you choose them over everything we've built, there's no coming back. The board will vote you out, and I won't stop them. Then vote me out. Nolan? Leonard started. Vote me out, Nolan repeated. Because I'm done pretending that profit margins are more important than people. I'm done sacrificing my personal life for a company that sees my daughter as a liability. He gathered his things and walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. For what it's worth, I would have been a terrible CEO anyway. I was turning into you, and that's not the man I want my daughter to know. You'll regret this, Harrison called after him. When the money runs out, when the novelty wears off, when you realize what you've thrown away, you'll regret this. Maybe, Nolan said, but I'd regret the alternative more. He left the boardroom, the company, and the life he'd spent 36 years building. In the elevator, he felt lighter than he had in years. His phone rang as he reached the lobby. Evelyn's name on the screen. Hey, he answered. How did it go? I'll tell you when I get back to the hotel. But Evelyn? Yeah? I love you, both of you. And I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out. There was silence on the other end, then the sound of her breathing, shaky with tears. I love you too, she whispered. We both do. As Nolan walked out of Crestwood Tower for the last time, the afternoon sun caught the windows above him, turning the building into a monument of reflected light. Beautiful, imposing, and ultimately, just glass and steel. His family was waiting for him across town, in a hotel room that felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. He'd made his choice. Now he got to live with it. 6 weeks later, Nolan Crestwood was learning that there was a significant difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich was what he'd become, someone with enough money and carefully managed investments to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Wealthy was what he'd lost, the kind of generational fortune that bought penthouses and yachts and the illusion that money could solve any problem. The apartment in Brooklyn Heights was a compromise between Evelyn's Park Slope place, which had become uninhabitable due to persistent paparazzi, and Nolan's former penthouse, which he'd sold within 2 weeks of leaving Crestwood Enterprises. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and a view of the Manhattan skyline that reminded him daily of the world he'd left behind. But this morning, as he sat on the living room floor helping Isla practice tummy time, while Evelyn made coffee in the kitchen that was actually big enough for 2 people to cook in, he couldn't remember why that other world had ever seemed important. "She's getting stronger," Evelyn observed, settling beside them with 2 mugs. "Look how she's holding her head up." Isla, now 4.5 months old, was indeed demonstrating remarkable neck control as she pushed up on her tiny arms. Her dark hair had grown longer, forming soft curls that caught the morning light streaming through their east-facing windows. "She's going to be crawling soon," Nolan said, gently encouraging her efforts. "Are we ready for that? Are we ready for any of this?" Evelyn laughed, but there was contentment in her voice, not anxiety. The past 6 weeks had been a revelation in controlled chaos. Nolan had thrown himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once brought to board meetings and acquisition deals. He'd read every parenting book he could find, attended a new father's support group in Park Slope, and could now change a diaper, prepare formula, and detect the subtle differences in Isla's various cries with something approaching expertise. More importantly, he'd learned to be present. Not physically present while mentally calculating quarterly projections, but actually present, sitting on the floor making silly faces, reading picture books with voices for all the characters, staying up during 3 a.m. feedings not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Your phone's been quiet this morning," Evelyn observed. "I turned off the news alerts." For weeks after his departure from Crestwood Enterprises, his phone had buzzed constantly with updates about the company's plummeting stock price, the delayed IPO, and his father's increasingly desperate attempts to salvage the deal. Business journalists had initially painted him as either heroically principled or catastrophically naive, depending on their perspective on work-life balance. He'd stopped reading the coverage when he realized he genuinely didn't care what happened to the company anymore. "Any regrets?" Evelyn asked, the question she'd been asking in various forms since the day he'd walked out of that boardroom. "About leaving?" "No." He helped Isla roll onto her back, smiling as she immediately tried to grab his fingers. "About taking so long to leave?" "Every day. You couldn't have known. I could have tried harder. When you called that night, I could have listened instead of shutting down. I could have been there for her birth for those first weeks when you were figuring everything out alone. But you're here now." "I'm here now," he agreed, leaning over to kiss first Isla's forehead, then Evelyn's lips. "And I'm not going anywhere." The doorbell interrupted them, followed by a knock that sounded distinctly authoritative. Nolan frowned. They weren't expecting anyone, and most deliveries came through the building's concierge. "I'll get it," he said, scooping up Isla as he stood. Through the peephole, he saw a familiar figure in an expensive gray suit, silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Harrison Crestwood." "It's my father," Nolan said quietly. Evelyn's expression immediately became guarded. She'd never met Harrison, but she'd heard enough stories to know that his appearance on their doorstep wasn't likely to be a social call. "Do you want me to?" "No. We handle this together." Nolan opened the door, Isla in his arms, Evelyn at his side. Harrison's steel blue eyes, so like Nolan's own, took in the domestic scene with an expression that might have been disapproval or surprise. "Harrison," Nolan said evenly, "this is unexpected. May I come in?" "That depends. Are you here as my father or as the CEO of Crestwood Enterprises?" "I'm here as your grandfather." The words hung in the air like a peace offering. Nolan stepped aside, allowing Harrison into their living room with its mismatched furniture and baby gear scattered across every surface. Harrison's gaze immediately went to Isla, who was studying him with the intense curiosity she brought to all new faces. For a long moment, grandfather and granddaughter regarded each other with nearly identical expressions of careful assessment. "She has the Crestwood chin," Harrison said finally. And her mother's nose, Nolan replied. Evelyn? Harrison turned to her with the formal courtesy that was his default setting with strangers. I'm Harrison Crestwood. I apologize for the intrusion. Mr. Crestwood. Evelyn's voice was polite but cool. Would you like some coffee? That would be kind. Thank you. As Evelyn moved to the kitchen, Harrison continued to study Isla, who had now decided he was interesting enough to smile at. The expression that crossed the older man's face was so unfamiliar that it took Nolan a moment to recognize it as wonder. May I? Harrison asked, extending his arms. Nolan hesitated. His father had never held him as a baby, that he knew from family photos where Harrison stood stiffly in the background, while Nolan's mother did all the actual parenting. She's not used to strangers, he said. I'm not a stranger, I'm her grandfather. Something in Harrison's tone, a vulnerability Nolan had never heard before, made him carefully transfer Isla to his father's arms. She fussed briefly, then settled, apparently deciding that this new person was acceptable. Hello, little one, Harrison said softly, his usual commanding voice gentled almost beyond recognition. I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you. Evelyn returned with coffee, settling beside Nolan on the couch as they watched Harrison navigate holding a baby, with the careful concentration he usually reserved for complex financial documents. She's beautiful, Harrison said, not taking his eyes off Isla. Healthy? Very. She's hitting all her developmental milestones, Nolan replied. Good. That's good. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds Isla's soft babbling and the distant traffic from the street below. Harrison seemed content to simply hold his granddaughter, his usual restless energy completely stilled. The company's in trouble, he said eventually, still looking at Isla rather than Nolan. I know. The IPO has been postponed indefinitely. 3 major investors have pulled out. The board is discussing bringing in outside management. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Harrison's eyes finally met his son's. Sorry enough to come back? No. I could make it worth your while. Full reinstatement. A compensation package that would set your family up for generations. All you'd have to do is issue a statement about temporary personal circumstances. Return to your position. Harrison. Nolan's voice was firm but not angry. Look around this room, look at what I have here. Why would I give this up for a job that made me miserable? Because it's your legacy. Because it's what you were born to do. No, Nolan said quietly. This is what I was born to do. He gestured to Isla, to Evelyn, to the life they'd built in 6 weeks. Everything else was just preparation. Harrison was quiet for a long time, gently rocking Isla, who had fallen asleep in his arms. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. I was 38 when you were born, already consumed by building the business, convinced that success was the only thing that mattered. I thought providing for you was the same as loving you. It wasn't. It was easier, safer. I could control profit margins and market share. I couldn't control whether you'd love me back. The admission hung between them, 40 years of emotional distance finally acknowledged. You never tried, Nolan said, not accusingly, but as a simple statement of fact. I didn't know how. My father was the same way, distant, demanding, measuring worth in achievement rather than affection. I swore I'd be different with you, but, he shrugged, a gesture that looked strange on a man who usually projected absolute certainty. You can be different with her, Evelyn said quietly. If you want to be. Harrison looked at her with surprise as if he'd forgotten she was there. I'd like that, he said. If you'd allow it. She's your granddaughter, Nolan said. Of course we'd allow it. But Harrison, this isn't about the company. This isn't about getting me back. This is just about family. Just family, Harrison repeated as if testing the phrase. When did I start thinking those were small words? Isla stirred in her grandfather's arms, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. Harrison immediately began the gentle bouncing motion that all grandparents seem to know instinctively. I should go, he said. Let you get back to your morning. You could stay for breakfast, Evelyn offered. If you want to. I'd like that very much. As they moved to the kitchen, Harrison still carrying Isla, Nolan caught Evelyn's hand and squeezed it gently. She smiled at him, the kind of smile that said we're going to be okay, all of us. Looking at his father making silly faces at his daughter while Evelyn prepared pancakes and coffee filled the air with warmth and normalcy, Nolan realized that this was what winning actually looked like. Not market dominance or quarterly growth, but a 5-month-old baby who trusted him completely, a woman who loved him despite his flaws, and a father who was finally learning that the most important legacy wasn't built in boardrooms. It was built in moments like this, one ordinary morning at a time. 2 years later, the playground in Prospect Park buzzed with the joyful chaos of toddlers discovering the world one sandbox at a time. Nolan sat on a bench, laptop balanced on his knees, watching 26-month-old Isla navigate the climbing structure with the fearless determination that had become her trademark. "Daddy, look," she called, her vocabulary having exploded over the past few months. "I'm flying." She wasn't flying, she was hanging from a low bar, her little legs kicking in the air. But Nolan had learned that in Isla's world, the distinction between reality and possibility was wonderfully fluid. "I see you, sweetheart. You're very brave." His architecture firm, Crestwood Design, had grown from a one-man operation to a team of 12 in just 18 months. Specializing in sustainable residential projects and community spaces, it was everything his old life had never been: creative, meaningful, and small enough that he knew every client's name and every project's story. "How's the hospital project coming?" Evelyn asked, settling beside him with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. "Almost finished. The pediatric wing should be completed by Christmas." It was fitting, somehow, that his first major commission had been designing a new children's hospital in Queens. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd gone from acquiring buildings to creating spaces where families could heal. "And the other project?" Evelyn's eyes sparkled with mischief. Nolan closed the laptop and pulled out a small velvet box, the one he'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment that never seemed to come. "I was thinking maybe after her nap, when she's in a good mood." "Nolan." Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. "She's 2. She's going to be more interested in the box than what's in it. But I want it to be perfect. I want her to remember." "She's not going to remember the proposal. She's going to remember having parents who love each other." Before he could respond, Isla came running over, grass stains on her yellow dress and dirt smudged on her cheek. "Mama, Daddy, I made a friend." She pointed to a little boy who was determinedly building a sandcastle with the focused intensity of a master architect. "That's wonderful, baby," Evelyn said, automatically reaching for the wet wipes in her diaper bag. "What's his name?" "Tommy. He likes dinosaurs too." Isla had recently become obsessed with dinosaurs, much to Harrison's delight. Her grandfather had responded by filling her bookshelf with paleontology texts far too advanced for a toddler, though she enjoyed the pictures and had learned to roar like a surprisingly convincing Tyrannosaurus Rex. "Isla," Nolan said, his heart suddenly pounding. "Can you come here for a minute? Daddy wants to ask Mama something important." "Is it about dinner?" "I want mac and cheese." "It's not about dinner." Isla climbed onto the bench between them, immediately fascinated by the velvet box in Nolan's hands. She reached for it with the grabby instincts of a toddler who believed everything in the world existed for her entertainment. "Careful, sweetheart," Evelyn said, but she was looking at Nolan, not their daughter. "Evelyn Hart," Nolan began, then stopped. He'd rehearsed this speech dozens of times, had written and rewritten it, but suddenly none of those carefully chosen words seemed adequate. "What's in the box, Daddy?" "Something for Mama." "Is it candy? Mama likes chocolate." "It's not candy." Nolan opened the box, revealing a simple solitaire diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered it in tiny rainbows. "It's a ring." "Pretty." Isla immediately reached for it again. "It is pretty," Evelyn agreed, tears already forming in her eyes. "Very pretty." "Evelyn," Nolan tried again. 2.5 years ago, I was the kind of man who thought love was a luxury I couldn't afford. I built walls around my heart and called it success. I measured my worth in profit margins and board approvals." "Daddy's talking a lot," Isla observed, getting bored with the adults' conversation and scanning the playground for more interesting activities. "I am talking a lot," Nolan agreed, laughing despite his nerves. "The short version is, Mama, will you marry Daddy?" "Yes," Evelyn said immediately. "Of course, yes." "Really? Just like that?" "Just like that." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Isla clapped her hands with delight, though whether she understood the significance of the moment or was just happy to see her parents happy was unclear. "Are we having a party?" she asked hopefully. "We're having a wedding," Evelyn said, pulling their daughter into her lap. "A big party where Mama and Daddy promise to love each other forever. And me too. Especially you," Nolan said, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Forever and always. Can I have cake?" "You can have all the cake you want," And Uncle Harrison, too? Harrison had indeed become Uncle Harrison over the past 2 years, a transformation that had surprised everyone, including Harrison himself. He visited every Sunday for dinner, had learned to read picture books with appropriate dramatic flair, and had recently been caught teaching Isla to negotiate better terms for her bedtime routine. Uncle Harrison gets cake too, Evelyn confirmed. As they sat on the bench, Isla chattering about cake and dinosaurs and whether Uncle Harrison would dance at the wedding, Nolan marveled at how completely his definition of success had changed. Success wasn't the corner office on the 42nd floor, or seeing his name on the Forbes list. Success was Isla running to him when she fell down, knowing he'd make everything better. Success was Evelyn trusting him with her heart again, even after he'd broken it so badly the first time. Success was this: an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a playground with grass stains and sticky fingers and the woman he loved wearing his ring while their daughter planned their wedding reception around cake and dinosaurs. "I love you," he told Evelyn, the words easier now than they'd ever been. "I love you too, both of you." "Even when I'm being a dinosaur?" Isla asked, demonstrating her Tyrannosaurus Rex roar. "Especially when you're being a dinosaur," they said in unison. Later that evening, after Isla had been bathed and read to and tucked into her princess-themed bed, Nolan and Evelyn sat on their small balcony, overlooking the Brooklyn Heights promenade. The Manhattan skyline glittered across the water, beautiful and distant, like a life they'd once known but no longer needed. "Any regrets?" Evelyn asked, settling into his arms as the city quieted around them. "About the proposal? It wasn't exactly romantic. It was perfect, very us, practical, interrupted by a toddler, and absolutely perfect. I meant about all of it. The company, the money, the life we could have had." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know what I regret?" "What?" "I regret that we wasted so much time being scared of needing each other. I regret that Isla's first 3 months were just me instead of us. We can't change that." "No, but we can make sure the rest of her life is different. We can make sure she grows up knowing that love isn't something to be managed or controlled or compartmentalized. We can make sure she knows that family comes first, always, even before dinosaurs." "Well, let's not get crazy." As they laughed together, Nolan thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Successful, wealthy, and profoundly alone. That man would have looked at his current life and seen failure, a smaller bank account, a modest apartment, a business that would never make him rich. But that man had never held his daughter while she fell asleep against his chest. He'd never woken up next to a woman who loved him not for what he could provide, but for who he chose to be. He'd never experienced the particular joy of a 2-year-old's spontaneous hug or the way "I love you, Daddy" could make everything else in the world fade to background noise. That man had been successful by every measure that mattered to the world. This man was happy. And happiness, Nolan had learned, was the only success story that really mattered. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same choice as Nolan? Do you believe people can truly change when love gives them a reason to? What does real success mean to you? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.